Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. You're holding up the line for paying first-class passengers. The words dropped like a slap. Colonel Thomas Callahan paused, confused for a moment. Not by the words themselves, but by the tone. The gate agent, her name tag read Brenda, wasn't just moving things along. She was annoyed, embarrassed even, that a man like him was standing in her pristine first-class boarding lane. He looked down at the ticket in his hand. Seat 2A, first class. Window. Confirmed. This is my seat, he said quietly. I booked it months ago. Brenda didn't blink. Due to an aircraft change, that seat no longer exists. You've been reassigned. She didn't say it kindly. She didn't say it with patience. She said it loud enough for everyone around to hear. Tom's fingers tightened around the paper. What seat? 32B, middle, economy, she said flatly, already reaching to scan the next passenger. A younger man in a designer suit behind him scoffed. Yikes! From 2A to 32B? That's not a downgrade, that's a punishment. Laughter. Tom felt something crack, not in his back, but deeper. He'd stood in tighter lines than this, with more at stake. But the difference was, back then, the men around him looked him in the eye. Now, no one did. Before we dive deeper into what happens next, tell us where you're watching from. Have you ever seen quiet dignity mistaken for inconvenience? Hit like if you believe Medal of Honor should still mean something. He straightened his spine, slowly. Ma'am, he said gently, I'm traveling to a White House event. It's a Medal of Honor ceremony. This seat was confirmed by my granddaughter. I have chronic back injuries from service. That's in your system. Brenda typed something half-heartedly, never looking up. Sir, we respect your service, but you used reward miles. That puts you lower in the reseating priority. Our Diamond Elite passengers were reassigned first. Now, if you could please move along. She paused, then added with a shrug, Your loyalty status is what it is. There it was, a sentence so cold it didn't even sting. It froze. Tom felt it wash over him, the sharp, sudden edge of invisibility. He stepped away without protest. No one clapped. No one offered their seat. A few looked down at their phones, grateful it wasn't them. He found an empty seat near the window, away from the crowd, and slowly lowered himself into it. The back twinged, a reminder of old wounds from another lifetime. He folded the new boarding pass and stared at it. 32B, middle seat, economy, last boarding group, right next to the lavatory, most likely. And yet, that wasn't the part that stung. It was the look, the dismissiveness. The way she said, your loyalty status is what it is, as if sacrifice had an expiration date. In his wallet, he still carried the citation, the one that came with his Medal of Honor, folded into quarters, yellowed at the edges. He never showed it, never talked about it. He didn't need to. The people who mattered already knew. That seat, 2A, wasn't luxury. It was necessity. Sarah, his granddaughter, had pulled every favor she had to get it for him. She was Army too, a logistics officer. She knew how to plan ahead. She knew his back couldn't handle a 6-hour flight in coach. And now that seat was gone, handed off to someone who probably earned more in upgrades than he did in combat pay. He sat in silence as the boarding process continued. First class now, ironically. A uniformed flight attendant walked past him toward the podium, nodding at Brenda. She smiled at the woman, warm, respectful. The contrast was jarring. Tom's hand hovered near his wallet. He thought of Sarah again. She'd slipped a small card into his pocket the night before he flew. Grandpa, they say they take care of people like you, but you call this number if something goes wrong. It skips customer service. It's the Heroes Liaison Desk. Only a few people know about it. He had smiled and told her he probably wouldn't need it. He opened his wallet. There it was. A plain white card. Trans Global Airlines. Heroes Liaison Desk. Direct line. He took a breath. Long, slow, and dialed. 2 rings. Heroes Liaison, this is David speaking. How may I assist you? The voice was calm, human, not automated. Tom kept it brief. This is Colonel Thomas Callahan, Medal of Honor recipient. I was booked in first class, seat 2A, for flight 714. I've just been reassigned to 32B without warning. I'm en route to Washington for an official military event. The gate agent dismissed my situation. David didn't speak over him, just typed. Then, booking number, sir? Tom read it from the pass. Silence. Just keystrokes. Then a soft intake of breath on the other end. Colonel Callahan, David said, tone now sharpened with purpose. Please stay exactly where you are. This is being escalated to executive level response. Someone will meet you at gate C12 shortly. Click. Tom looked down at his phone, then at the pass. He didn't expect much. He'd learned not to, but somewhere deep inside, something had stirred. Something that hadn't stirred in a long time. The soft hum of gate announcements blended with the rustle of newspaper pages and coffee cup clinks. Travelers shuffled past, their carry-ons dragging behind them like indifferent shadows. No one noticed the old man sitting alone by the window at gate C12. He looked like just another senior citizen with a misplaced boarding pass. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing toward Tom. Is he homeless? She asked in a whisper, not unkind, just curious. The mother gently shook her head and moved them along. Tom didn't hear. Or maybe he did, and just didn't flinch. Years in the Marines had taught him to remain still, especially when the room turned cold. He sat in silence, staring at the gate door. 32 Bravo. It sounded like a radio call sign. It wasn't the downgrade that stung the most. It was the way they said it. Like it was his fault. Like his years had made him invisible, and his medals had gathered more dust than meaning. Brenda continued checking in first-class passengers with flawless corporate polish. Her name tag caught the light every time she moved. Behind her, the platinum-plated sign read, "Your loyalty deserves first priority." Tom almost smiled at that. Almost. Mark, the younger gate agent beside her, kept glancing toward Tom. His fingers hovered nervously over his tablet. Twice he opened his mouth, and twice he closed it. Brenda never looked at him. Something in the kid's face suggested he knew this didn't sit right. But he was too new, too junior, too afraid to speak. At 7:58 a.m., a boarding announcement echoed overhead. Trans-Global Flight 714 to Dulles is now boarding first-class and Diamond Elite passengers at Gate C12. Passengers began to form a line. A few looked curiously at the older man who was still sitting, ticket in hand, not moving. Someone whispered, "Did he miss his zone?" Another voice muttered, "He's probably confused." At that moment, Tom sat straighter. Not by much, but enough to feel it. A memory, maybe. Or maybe just a quiet flicker of pride, like an instinct kicking in. That's when Mark stepped forward. He walked over slow but steady. "Excuse me, sir," he said, voice soft. "Is everything all right?" Tom looked up. Mark didn't expect the eyes that met his. Calm, focused, like he was used to assessing young soldiers. Like he could spot courage or cowardice in a heartbeat. "I'm fine," Tom said simply. "Just waiting." Mark hesitated, then nodded, half relieved, half ashamed. "If you need anything." Tom held up the card in his hand. The hero's liaison said someone would be coming. Mark blinked. He didn't even know that number existed. Meanwhile, Brenda was laughing at something a Diamond Elite passenger had said, loud enough for the front of the boarding line to chuckle with her. Someone handed her a business card. She slipped it into her blazer like it was gold. None of them noticed the quiet shift in the terminal air, until it was too late. At 8:05 a.m., a hush swept across the far side of Terminal C. Not all at once. Just that kind of silence that comes before something important happens. 6 people appeared near the main corridor. 3 men in executive suits. 1 woman with a headset and clipboard. Two individuals in navy blue with federal badges around their necks. They weren't walking. They were moving with purpose, and everyone felt it. Brenda paused in mid-sentence as the group approached. Her smile faltered for the first time all morning. Edward Sterling, President and CEO of Transglobal Airlines, was at the front. His face flushed from the brisk walk. His eyes scanned the gate area with the urgency of a man who just found out he had a PR fireball waiting to explode. He didn't look at Brenda. He didn't look at the first-class passengers. He looked straight at Tom Callahan and walked directly toward him. Passengers turned. Conversations stopped. Phones came out, discreetly at first. Brenda's face turned pale. Mark took an instinctive step backward. "Colonel Callahan?" Sterling said, breath short. "Sir, my name is Edward Sterling. I'm the president of Transglobal Airlines." Tom looked up, calm as ever. "Mr. Sterling," he said with a small nod. "You came quickly." Sterling didn't waste a second. "Sir, please accept my deepest, most personal apologies for the shameful treatment you received at this gate this morning." He turned and gestured toward the podium. "The reassignment of your seat was not only inappropriate, it was in violation of multiple internal policies and external protocol." Brenda stood frozen, colorless, a statue in high heels. "I had a confirmed ticket," Tom said softly. 2A, first class. "And that is exactly where you'll be sitting," Sterling replied. "In fact, if anyone on this flight needs to be reassigned, it will be me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Tom tilted his head slightly. "I'm just trying to make it to DC on time." "You will, sir," Sterling assured him, "with full honors." Behind Sterling, the woman with the headset stepped forward. "Colonel Callahan," she said gently, "on behalf of the IAPEC, International Airline Passenger Ethics Council, we'd like to personally recognize your service and clarify that your call this morning triggered a protocol alert." Tom blinked. He hadn't expected that. "IAPEC?" Brenda whispered, confused. Sterling didn't even glance at her. "I don't think you realize who he is," the headset woman said quietly. "Colonel Callahan is not just a Medal of Honor recipient. He's one of the founding veteran liaisons who helped draft the IAPEC ethics code used across 9 international carriers." The silence that followed was almost holy. You could hear someone drop a magazine 2 gates down. Brenda opened her mouth, then shut it. For once, there was nothing to say. "Please," Sterling said to Tom, motioning gently. "Let me escort you to the jet bridge personally. Your seat is ready." Tom rose slowly, not because he needed help, but because he wanted to take one last look at the gate. The posters, the loyalty slogans. The people who didn't look twice at him an hour ago, now watching with the reverence they'd forgotten they still had. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He just walked, with quiet dignity, toward the jet bridge. Sterling walked beside him. Phones filmed from every direction. Some passengers stood. One man placed his hand over his heart. Back at the podium, Brenda nearly collapsed into her chair. Her screen flickered. A message blinked in red. "Gate agent under immediate audit. Suspension recommended." Mark watched it, then slowly turned and followed the others. Brenda didn't sit. Not quite. She half-perched on the edge of her seat behind the gate podium, hands clenched tight on the keyboard, jaw visibly locked. Her skin had lost color, her eyes darting toward the crowd like a spotlight searching for someone else to blame. The gate area was still buzzing from what had just happened. Edward Sterling, CEO of Transglobal Airlines, had just personally walked a quiet, elderly man onto the plane, and the terminal was still catching its breath. People whispered. Phones were out. One kid in a hoodie muttered, "I think that old guy's like military royalty or something." Brenda heard it all, and she hated every second of it. Mark stood quietly to her left, his face unreadable, but his eyes avoiding hers. He'd said nothing during the entire scene. He didn't need to. Silence could speak volumes, especially when it came from the junior agent you'd just shushed half an hour earlier. A minute passed, then another. The flight was still at the gate, final boarding underway. The monitor above still blinked on time like nothing had happened. But Brenda was fuming. She clicked aggressively through pages on her terminal, eyes scanning every log. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. Mark said nothing. "I followed procedure. Aircraft changed. We had fewer first-class seats. He had a reward ticket. It's all in the system." Mark finally glanced up. "Doesn't mean it was right." Brenda's head snapped toward him. "What did you say?" "I said maybe policy isn't always the same as doing the right thing." She stared at him like he'd just grown two heads. "Oh, so now you're a hero too?" "I didn't say that," he replied, calm. But he was. Brenda stood up. Not all the way, just enough to loom. She leaned forward across the counter, eyes sharp. "He was holding up the line. And frankly, I don't care what medal he got 50 years ago. I've got 6 Diamond Elite passengers who spend $40K a year flying this airline. You think a retired vet with a free ticket outranks that?" Mark didn't flinch, but something behind him did. A woman holding a toddler, early 40s, army hoodie, combat boots. She turned her head slowly toward Brenda. "You might want to lower your voice," she said, calm but cold. "I'm pretty sure this entire gate just watched your job unravel on live stream." Brenda froze. She hadn't noticed. The woman held her phone angled slightly upward, red recording icon flashing in the corner. A dozen others had done the same. Her voice, "I don't care what medal he got," was probably already bouncing around military Facebook groups nationwide. Brenda backpedaled. "Well, out of context, it sounded exactly like what it was," the woman said sharply. She scooped her toddler closer and turned away without another word. Brenda slumped back into her seat, face flushed with heat. But even now, even with the walls closing in, she wasn't ready to surrender. "People get too emotional over these things," she snapped. "It's a seat. It's just a seat." Mark looked at her then. Really looked. "You think this was about the seat?" Brenda waved her hand dismissively. "It always is." Mark shook his head. "No, it's about the way you made him feel when you handed him that paper. The way you spoke to him, like he didn't matter." She scoffed. "He made it about himself. White House this, Medal of Honor that. I wasn't rude." "You were," Mark said flatly. And now Brenda's defense finally cracked. The sarcasm, the distance, the fake professionalism. It all snapped. "Fine," she snapped. "You want to be the hero? Go ahead. But don't pretend that man's more important than the rules. The rules are what keep this chaos from falling apart." Mark didn't raise his voice, didn't argue. He just said, "Then maybe we need better rules." Across the terminal, the last boarding group was called. Passengers trickled into the jet bridge. Several of them paused briefly to look toward the gate counter before moving on. Their faces weren't angry, just disappointed, as if something human had failed in that space, and they'd seen it with their own eyes. The silence that settled after was heavier than the noise, and then a quiet chime from Brenda's screen. "Incoming internal memo. Executive action. Flagged employee C12B." She clicked it open. "Pending internal investigation into reseating incident involving IAPEC-linked VIP. Temporary suspension from frontline duties recommended." She stared at the words for a long time. Then, finally, she sat back. And, for once, she had nothing to say. Meanwhile, in the cabin, Tom Callahan sat by the window in seat 1A. The sun had risen just enough to pour soft golden light over the tarmac. A flight attendant knelt beside him, carefully placing his blazer into a garment bag so it wouldn't wrinkle. Across the aisle, a man in a business suit stared at Tom, then slowly extended a hand. "Sir," he said, "my father served in Vietnam. I just want to say thank you." Tom nodded once, warm but humble. "Appreciate it." The man sat back, swallowing hard. Flight 714 pulled away from the gate at 8:23 a.m. The wheels turned, slow but steady. Inside the terminal, Brenda watched through the window, arms folded. Mark stood behind her, arms at his sides. Neither spoke. But one of them had learned something. The other had not. Back on board, the captain made his welcome announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're honored to have aboard a very special passenger today. Colonel Thomas Callahan, Medal of Honor recipient and veteran of the United States Marine Corps. Please join me in thanking him for his service." The entire first-class cabin applauded. A few flight attendants in economy stood straighter. Someone from the back whispered, "That's him?" Tom didn't wave. He simply nodded once, then looked out the window again. Not proud, not smug, just still. Because that's what dignity looks like. Not loud, not flashy, just unmoved by anything unworthy of its weight. The plane had reached cruising altitude. Outside, the clouds rolled past like slow waves across an endless sky. Inside the cabin, everything had settled into that strange quiet that comes after takeoff. Tray tables down, books open, headphones in. Except for seat 1A, where Colonel Thomas Callahan sat with his hands resting gently on his lap, eyes open, but looking nowhere in particular. He wasn't thinking about the seat, or the champagne, or the public apology that had just happened 30 minutes ago in front of the entire gate. No, his mind was somewhere else. Down the aisle, one of the flight attendants leaned toward another. Their voices were low, but not low enough. "Did you see the CEO literally run into the gate?" the younger one asked. "That guy, Callahan, must be, like, military royalty or something." The older attendant nodded. "You don't get the president out of an executive boardroom unless someone's pulling real strings." "Yeah, but how? I mean, I looked him up real quick. He's got some old Medal of Honor citation, sure, but that's it. No recent press, no VIP marker in our system." The older attendant gave her a look. "That's because the real ones don't need press," she said. "They don't need a marker." In first class, a businessman 2 rows back pulled out his phone and searched the name, Thomas Callahan, Medal of Honor. The first result was a Wikipedia page. Vietnam, rescue under fire, solo mission, 6 confirmed saves. The second result was a speech transcript, dated 2011. Something called the Geneva Convention on Civilian Protection and Airline Ethics. At the top of the page, remarks by Colonel Thomas Callahan, Honorary Ethics Advisor to the International Airline Passenger Ethics Council, IAPEC. The man blinked. He looked up toward the front of the plane. That guy? He's one of the people who wrote the ethics code that this airline's supposed to follow? Back at the gate, Mark was still seated behind the podium. Brenda had been quietly ushered away by the assistant station manager about 10 minutes earlier. Her badge was gone, her tablet access revoked. She hadn't said a word. Mark stared at the empty seat where Tom had waited earlier that morning. Something about the man's calm had stayed with him. The way he didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, didn't try to prove anything. It had taken Mark half a shift to realize that's what real weight feels like. It doesn't shout. It just walks in the room and changes the air. Back on the plane, the woman in the army hoodie, the same one who'd recorded Brenda earlier, stepped forward from her seat in row 6. She gently approached the first-class section and waited by the galley. A flight attendant glanced at her, then nodded with quiet understanding. The woman stepped forward and knelt beside Tom's seat. "Sir," she said softly, "I didn't want to disturb you earlier, but I just wanted to say thank you. My father served under your command, Captain Eli Rodriguez, K-Son. He spoke of you often." Tom blinked. A long, quiet pause followed. Then he smiled, gentle and tired, but real. "Rodriguez," he said. "Tough as nails. Always had too much coffee in him and never enough sleep." The woman laughed. "That's him." She reached into her coat pocket and held out a small envelope. "My dad passed 2 years ago, but he always said if he ever ran into you again, to give you this." Tom accepted it carefully. The envelope was old, creased from years of being kept in a wallet, but never opened. He didn't open it now, he just held it. Some things didn't need to be rushed. From the cockpit, the captain stepped out quietly. He nodded at the lead flight attendant, then walked down the aisle. He stopped at seat 1A and stood for a moment. "Colonel Callahan," he said respectfully, "on behalf of this entire crew, we're honored to have you aboard. I wanted you to know that this flight will be dedicated in your name as part of our internal ethics campaign. It's already been logged. You've reminded us all what standards are supposed to look like." Tom nodded again. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "Just treat the next old guy in line better than the last one." The captain smiled. "I'll remember that." He returned to the cockpit. Meanwhile, in a boardroom hundreds of miles away, at Transglobal Airlines HQ in Chicago, a team of legal executives and brand officers sat in tight silence. The screen in front of them displayed a red banner. IAPEC alert, severe ethical breach, Flight 744, Gate C12. Someone from the compliance team whispered, "Wait, Callahan? The Geneva delegate? He founded the liaison protocol." Someone else swore under their breath. The COO rubbed his temples. "We didn't just mess up with a veteran," he said. "We violated the damn ethics framework he helped write." A beat. "And we did it at a public gate." Back on the plane, Tom finally opened the envelope. Inside was a photo, faded but clear. 6 men, uniforms torn, covered in dust, smiling. He was in the middle. A scribbled note on the back read, "To the man who carried us home. If we ever forget men like you, we deserve to lose our seats. ER." Tom closed the envelope slowly. He tucked it back into his pocket. Because that's the thing about real honor. It doesn't fade with age. It doesn't need validation. It just waits, quiet, until someone finally remembers what it looks like. The meeting room on the second floor of Dulles Airport's administrative wing wasn't particularly large, but today it felt even smaller. Brenda sat stiffly in a plain chair across from 2 individuals wearing black blazers with corporate ethics and compliance stitched on their visitor lanyards. To her right sat the assistant station manager, arms folded, avoiding eye contact. The room smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner. A single notepad lay on the table. No one had touched it yet. No one needed to. One of the compliance officers, a woman in her 50s with wireframe glasses and a calm, controlled voice, broke the silence. "Ms. Holloway, before we begin, we want to make clear that this isn't a formal disciplinary hearing, yet." Brenda nodded once, eyes sharp. The woman continued, "This is a preliminary fact-finding session. You are not being accused, yet, of a policy violation. However, the IAPEC escalation protocol has been triggered. That is, not something we ignore." Brenda sat straighter. "Triggered by what?" she asked, keeping her voice even. "I followed seat reassignment protocol. There was a change in aircraft, fewer first-class seats. The Medal of Honor passenger booked with miles. He was bumped behind full-fare elites. That's standard reseating." She crossed her arms. "I didn't do anything wrong?" The second compliance officer, a younger man with an iPad, tapped it twice and turned the screen. It showed a still frame from a video. Her face, her lips parted mid-sentence. The caption below read, "I don't care what medal he got 50 years ago." Brenda flinched. "Out of context," she snapped. "Someone recorded that without my consent." The older officer didn't blink. Context or not, that clip was uploaded to 3 major veteran advocacy channels in under 90 minutes. It's been shared over 2.8 million times as of this morning. Brenda's throat tightened. "That's not fair. I was under pressure. I had 6 elite members breathing down my neck. I had a line wrapping into the concourse." "And you had a Medal of Honor recipient in front of you," the woman replied softly. Brenda looked away. The assistant station manager finally spoke. "Brenda, why didn't you escalate the issue? You knew we have a heroes liaison policy in place. You've seen the protocol packet." Brenda scoffed. "That number? I always thought it was PR fluff. We get 10 of those laminated cards in a drawer, and no one ever uses them." The room fell silent. Then the younger officer spoke, more carefully. "Ms. Holloway, do you know who Colonel Callahan actually is?" She frowned. "Some Vietnam guy?" The man turned his iPad again, this time to a document header. IAPEC Charter, Passenger Dignity Framework, authored by Colonel Thomas Callahan, 2011. He waited. Brenda blinked. "So he wrote the rules?" The woman nodded. "He helped create the entire international system of passenger ethics we now follow. He's one of only 3 Medal of Honor recipients ever asked to advise a global airline council. His recommendations led directly to the Heroes Liaison line." Brenda's shoulders sank. The iPad screen went dark, and just like that, the full weight of what she'd said finally landed. Back in Chicago, the Trans-Global boardroom was quiet. Again. On the big screen was a paused video of the same clip. Brenda's infamous quote, now edited with black and white slow motion, background piano, and the text, "Honor deserves more than a middle seat." It had become the intro to a campaign launched by veterans, urging better treatment of senior passengers, particularly those with military service. The airline's head of communications turned to the CEO. "Well, Edward, we've lost control of the narrative." Edward Sterling didn't respond right away. He was staring at another screen. This one showed Tom Callahan's old military photo side by side with a shot of him sitting in 1A, the American flag barely visible out the window. A tweet from a veteran's widow read, "He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't even stand, and yet the room moved around him." Sterling finally spoke. "Has the IAPEC board responded?" His legal counsel nodded. "They've proposed a resolution. They want to implement something called the Callahan Clause. It would require all member airlines to retrain staff on ethics standards relating to distinguished service passengers. And they want us to adopt it first, as a gesture of goodwill." Sterling sighed. "And if we don't?" The head of government relations answered. "Then they'll pull our compliance certification. That alone could kill $72 million in joint international code-share contracts." Sterling stood. "Then we implement it." Back at the airport, Mark was watching the same video from his break room phone. He watched Brenda's words again, this time overlaid with the faces of 6 other veterans who had been denied services in past incidents, unearthed by viewers after the story went viral. He scrolled down and found the official company memo. Effective immediately, all staff must undergo updated IAPEC training modules under the newly adopted Callahan Clause. Gate agents who handle first class and priority boarding will be recertified under enhanced dignity protocols. Mark exhaled. For once, it felt like someone had listened. Brenda, meanwhile, sat in the admin hallway outside HR. No one spoke to her. No one looked her way. She was scrolling through comments under the viral video, hands shaking. Shame on her. Medal of Honor means something. This is what happens when you forget who built the runway you're standing on. She didn't just embarrass herself. She embarrassed all of us. Brenda locked her phone. Tears welled in her eyes. But it was too late. On board Flight 714, as the aircraft began its descent into Dulles, Tom Callahan folded the photo of Eli Rodriguez and tucked it gently back into the envelope. The captain's voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Washington, D.C. We'd like to take this moment to once again thank Colonel Callahan for flying with us today, and for reminding us all that honor doesn't expire." The cabin applauded again, this time longer. Tom didn't move. He didn't wave. But he allowed himself the smallest smile, because the world may forget for a while, but dignity always finds its way back. The landing was smooth. Flight 714 touched down at Dulles International Airport without a bump, and as the wheels slowed along the runway, the cabin erupted into another quiet round of applause. Not for the landing, but for Seat 1A. Some clapped softly. Others just nodded in Tom's direction. He didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge the attention. He simply adjusted the crease of his slacks and looked straight ahead, waiting. When the plane pulled up to the gate, Tom was the last to leave. On purpose. He didn't like crowds. Never had. And he didn't need a parade to validate a seat he'd paid for, no matter how delayed that validation had been. As he stepped off the plane, the lead flight attendant was waiting near the jet bridge. She placed her hand gently on his arm. "There's someone waiting for you at the terminal, sir," she said. "Said you'd know why once you saw him." Tom raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He walked into the corridor and stopped. There, standing just beyond the security divider, was a man in a dark gray uniform. Not TSA, not Airline. Department of Transportation by the looks of the badge on his chest. He was tall, mid-40s, black suit, clean shave, sharp, professional. But his eyes held something else, respect and recognition. He extended his hand before speaking. "Colonel Callahan," he said. "My name is Marcus Everett. I'm with the IAPEC Civilian Oversight Task Force." Tom shook his hand. "Didn't expect a welcoming committee?" Everett smiled. "You've triggered a protocol that hasn't been used in almost 15 years. They walked together toward a quieter part of the terminal, past the crowds, past the bustle. Just the two of them. Tom didn't speak. He waited. Everett was the first to break the silence. "My father served under you." That made Tom stop. "I've had a few dozen under my command," he said slowly. "What was his name?" "Harold Everett, 3rd Battalion, Da Nang, 1969. Tom's breath caught. He hadn't heard that name in a long, long time. "Everett," he repeated softly. "Quiet man, sharp shot, carried 2 radios and never dropped either. Took shrapnel to the chest but still walked 20 yards to drag a wounded corporal out of a minefield." Marcus smiled. "He always said you were the reason he came home. Said you stayed behind when the evac bird was full, just to make sure no one was left in the tree line." Tom looked away for a moment. Something passed over his face. Too faint to be sadness, too quiet to be regret. "I didn't do it alone." "You never do," Marcus replied. They sat on a nearby bench, away from the main flow of passengers. "Colonel," Marcus said carefully, "what happened this morning has already set off a chain of events inside Transglobal and across IAPEC." Tom just listened. "The clip of Brenda's remarks is now being cited as a textbook case of dignity failure, and your conduct, your patience, your silence, it's being studied at training centers as we speak. Not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't." Tom chuckled lightly. "Most days, I don't say much of anything." Marcus nodded. "And yet, the room still shifts when you walk in." He pulled a small folder from his briefcase. Inside, a proposal. Callahan Clause. A binding recommendation to all IAPEC member airlines, requiring new mandatory ethics recertification for frontline staff, including recognition and respect for distinguished service passengers. Tom opened the folder, read in silence. At the bottom was a signature line. It was blank. Marcus looked at him. "We're asking if you'd be willing to endorse it, not as a PR move, as a standard, as a principle." Tom stared at the page, then tapped a line halfway down. "This paragraph," he said. "It says, military or decorated service. That's too narrow. There are teachers, firefighters, nurses. Some of them carry more scars than I do." Marcus blinked. "You want to expand it? I want to widen the doorway." There was silence. Then Marcus nodded slowly. "I'll make the revision." Tom didn't sign. Not yet. He closed the folder and handed it back. "You'll get it when it's worded right." Marcus smiled. "I believe that." Just then, a voice called from behind the security divider. "Grandpa!" Tom turned. Sarah, in full uniform. Her hair pulled back into a perfect regulation bun. Her officer's cap in one hand, a tote bag in the other. She broke protocol, stepping past the barrier, and hugged him, tight, like a daughter, not just a soldier. "I saw the clip," she whispered. "I'm sorry." Tom shook his head. "Don't be. You gave me the card." She smiled through a tear. "You kept it?" He reached into his blazer pocket, held it up, folded, creased, but still there. Marcus stood, gave Sarah a respectful nod. "Captain Callahan, your grandfather just improved international air policy before lunch." She grinned. "Again?" Tom chuckled. "I just asked for a better sentence." The three of them stood quietly for a moment, watching travelers pass by, watching families reunite, watching time roll forward, one step at a time. No cameras, no speeches, just a veteran, a granddaughter, and the son of a soldier who had once been pulled from a battlefield by a man who never sought attention, but never looked away. The lobby of the hotel was quiet, just the sound of a piano loop playing softly through the speakers and the occasional chime of the elevator. Tom sat near the fireplace, a steaming cup of black coffee resting in his hands. The smell reminded him of early field briefings in the jungle, back when you boiled water in a steel canteen and passed the tin mug around the circle. He wasn't thinking about the flight anymore, or the seat, or even the apology. He was thinking about the pattern. Because this, what happened at the gate, wasn't isolated. He had seen it too many times in too many places. An old man speaks softly. A younger person doesn't listen. Systems become so obsessed with policy, they forget who the policy is supposed to serve. And when the story goes viral, they scramble, not because it was wrong, but because it was public. He sipped the coffee. Sarah was upstairs, preparing for a meeting with the event coordinators for the Medal of Honor ceremony. She'd asked if he wanted to come. He said he needed a minute. On the side table next to him was a manila folder. Inside it, the revised proposal for the Callahan Clause. The ethics amendment Marcus Everett had promised. The wording had changed. It no longer said military or decorated service. Now it read, "Any passenger of distinguished public contribution, including but not limited to military veterans, first responders, lifelong educators, and nationally recognized service awardees." Tom ran his thumb over the edge of the paper. Better, wider, but still missing one piece: teeth. He reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out his phone, not the one Sarah had given him. The other one, the one with just 3 contacts. He stared at the screen for a moment, then tapped the name. Director H. Lang, DOT Ethics Commission. It rang once, twice, then clicked. A woman answered. "Director Lang's office. This is Colonel Thomas Callahan. I'm calling under Article 7C of the Appea Oversight Charter." Silence. Then a shift in tone. "One moment, Colonel." The line went dead for 3 seconds. Then a new voice came on, gravelly, clipped, focused. "Colonel, this is Helen Lang. I wondered when you'd ring." Tom smiled faintly. Didn't want to cause a stir. Lang laughed. "Too late." They spoke for just over 3 minutes. No raised voices, no legal threats. Just facts, dates, footage, language, prior violations, non-compliance with cross-border ethics standards. At the end, Lang said quietly, "Do you want us to start the Level 2 review?" Tom thought for a moment, then replied, "Start the internal advisory first. Let them correct themselves. If they don't, we'll proceed." Lang was quiet for a beat. Then, "You always did prefer the high road." "I prefer the right road," Tom said, and ended the call. He didn't need to say more, because once that process began, once the advisory letter hit the desks of every boardroom in the Trans-Global Alliance, the system would begin to shift under its own weight. He wouldn't have to lift a finger. Just watch. Later that afternoon, Tom and Sarah were escorted into a pre-event reception at the National Archives. Marble walls, polished brass railings, light filtering through glass ceilings. He hadn't worn his full uniform in years, but he had agreed to wear the ribbon bar on his lapel. Sarah insisted. He didn't argue. They walked in slowly. At first, no one noticed. Then a voice near the entrance spoke up, soft but certain. "That's him. That's the one from the airport." Heads turned, Not in spectacle, in recognition. Someone stepped forward, a man in a TSA blazer. "Sir," he said to Tom, "I just wanted to thank you. We've been retraining this week, and they showed us the footage. The way you handled it, I've never seen dignity land that hard." Tom nodded politely. "I hope you never have to again." At the far end of the hall, a woman from the Federal Office of Passenger Equity greeted them. She shook Tom's hand, then turned to Sarah. "I heard your grandfather's call is already being drafted into ethics curriculum across 3 training centers." Sarah blinked. "Curriculum?" 3-day workshop. Callahan Protocols in Public Engagement. First class starts Monday. Sarah looked at her grandfather. He raised an eyebrow. "You're becoming required reading," she murmured. The reception continued. Quiet conversations, gentle clinks of glassware, the kind of polite energy that lives in DC buildings with columns. But underneath it all, something had begun. Back in Chicago, the executive VP of International Partnerships for TransGlobal stared at the PDF that had just hit his inbox. Subject line: Pre-advisory, Non-compliance, Passenger Ethics Enforcement, Case ID MC12714, Callahan. The contents were worse than expected. A 14-page preliminary review. 3 previous incidents flagged. 1 more, and the airline could lose its ethics certification. He looked across the room at the General Counsel. "We need to act," he said. "Now." At the same time, the TransGlobal Internal Ethics Board began quietly pulling employee files. Brenda Holloway's was at the top. Mark's name was there too. But next to it, under Independent Observation Report, employee demonstrated empathy, situational awareness, and concern. Recommend reassignment to senior gate protocol after training. Meanwhile, on social media, the clip of Tom sitting silently with the boarding pass in hand, just before Brenda's infamous line, was now trending under a new hashtag, #Per32. No more veterans posted photos of their boarding passes. Teachers, nurses, firefighters, even airline staff. Some wrote just a single line: "I fly with honor. So should you." Tom didn't know all that. Not yet. He didn't check hashtags, didn't monitor networks. He sat beside his granddaughter, sipping water, waiting for the ceremony to begin. And when the lights dimmed and the national anthem played, he stood, taller than anyone expected. Because some men don't just carry medals, they carry reminders of what we still owe each other. The hallway outside the executive wing at TransGlobal headquarters had gone quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that follows a warning shot. And Brenda Holloway, now reassigned to a non-customer-facing scheduling role on the lower floor, could feel it in her bones. She still showed up to work on time, still wore her blazer, still kept her badge clipped to her belt like nothing had changed, but she knew everyone else did too. Her desk now faced a blank wall, no terminal access to active gate schedules, no interaction with passengers, just reassignments and printouts and silence. No one said the word demotion, but no one had to. Meanwhile, across the hall, Mark had received an unexpected tap on the shoulder. "Management wants to see you," someone said. "Bring your credentials." He'd walked into the room expecting, well, he didn't know what he expected. A warning? A lecture? Instead, he found himself sitting across from 2 senior executives in pressed suits, both of whom had the same video clip paused on a laptop screen in front of them. His face, looking back at Tom Callahan at Gate C12. One of the execs pressed play. Mark's voice echoed softly from the speakers. "Maybe we need better rules." They paused, looked at him. "Do you still believe that?" one asked. Mark straightened in his chair. "I do." The executive nodded slowly. "Good, because we'd like you to be part of the internal working group implementing them." While Mark was still processing what that meant, the corporate communications team had already launched a quiet purge. All promotional material featuring loyalty tier taglines was pulled from circulation. New campaigns were being drafted with less emphasis on status and more on stewardship, respect, and human value. One internal memo read, Following the C-12 incident, tone and language across customer-facing messaging must shift. Our brand is not exclusivity. Our brand is inclusivity with integrity. The memo didn't mention Brenda, but her words hung over the entire initiative like a dark watermark. In a windowless boardroom in New York, executives from 3 partner airlines were on a conference call with Appea observers. One of them spoke with quiet urgency. If Transglobal goes into full review and we're still code sharing with them, we risk association penalties. Another agreed. We need to show we're proactive, distance ourselves if they stall on implementation. The third didn't speak. She just sent an internal message to her HR director. Begin internal audit of passenger complaints involving frontline staff and military ID holders. Flag all unresolved. The ripple was spreading, not in headlines, not yet, but inside boardrooms, inside briefing rooms, inside the quiet corners of the industry that knew what was coming next. At Appea headquarters in Geneva, a wall-sized display listed the 12 active review cases for 2025. Only one was blinking in red. Transglobal Airlines. Gate C-12 incident. Callahan Protocol. Article 7 review. A junior analyst approached her supervisor with a report. Ma'am, I've run the analytics. After Colonel Callahan's endorsement, the training module we released last week has already been accessed by over 9,000 frontline staff across 5 countries. The supervisor looked up, surprised. That's 3 times the projection. The analyst nodded. Words getting around. And still, Brenda didn't know. Not fully. She saw the memo, saw the posters being changed, saw the shift in hallway conversations. But she didn't see what was forming behind the scenes. She didn't know that her name was now part of a case study, that universities were requesting transcripts of the footage for ethics seminars, that federal transportation advisors were citing her behavior as a failure to act on implicit responsibility. She just knew that no one looked at her the same way, that when she walked into the break room, conversation stopped, that Mark no longer said good morning, that 2 interns from HR had been shadowing her for the past 3 days. Training, they claimed. She knew the walls were moving. She just didn't know how fast. In Washington, D.C., the day of the Medal of Honor ceremony had arrived. Tom stood outside the National Mall, dressed in a charcoal suit with a small ribbon bar pinned neatly over his chest. No fanfare, no press. Just Sarah at his side, adjusting the collar of his coat. You sure you're okay going in there? She asked. He gave her a sideways glance. I've been through worse doors. She smiled. And then, a voice behind them. Colonel Callahan. They turned. A man in a dark overcoat stepped forward, holding a small folder. I'm with the Office of Civil Aviation Integrity. Just wanted to let you know, your revisions to the Callahan Clause were formally adopted by the Appea Council this morning. He handed over the document. Tom took it, scanned it. His edit was there, in full. Honor is not a status level. It is a human standard, and every human deserves to fly with dignity. The man nodded. There will be pushback, but the tide's turning. Tom didn't reply. He just closed the folder and tucked it under his arm. Across the world, in airports from San Francisco to Singapore, digital posters began rolling out in silence. A new tagline across dozens of terminals. Respect isn't earned by points, it's given by principle. Below it, a photo, not of Tom standing proud, but of Tom sitting quietly at gate C-12, holding a boarding pass. The moment before the world remembered who he was. A week after the Medal of Honor ceremony, Gate C-12 looked different. The same seats, same lighting, same wall-mounted monitors blinking quietly with flight numbers and cities. But something had shifted. People stood straighter. Voices were a little softer. The space felt watched. Not by cameras, by conscience. At precisely 9 o'clock a.m., 3 Transglobal executives stepped into the gate area with an escort from the Federal Office of Civil Aviation. Behind them was a small podium. Two flags flanked it, one for the airline, the other for the Department of Transportation. Dozens of employees stood gathered in a half circle. Gate agents, flight attendants, ground crew, a few pilots. Mark stood near the back. He didn't speak, but he was watching. A corporate spokesperson approached the mic. "This morning, we gather not for ceremony, but for accountability." He let that word hang for a moment. There are moments in an organization's history when a mistake becomes more than a misstep. It becomes a mirror. And we are here today because one man, without raising his voice, held that mirror up. A pause. Then he continued. As of this morning, Transglobal Airlines has officially adopted the Callahan Clause. Developed in cooperation with Appea, the Department of Transportation, and representatives from veteran advocacy and public service groups across 4 countries. Murmurs rippled. No one clapped. It wasn't that kind of announcement. It was heavier, more lasting. The spokesperson gestured toward a newly installed plaque, mounted just left of the boarding podium. Brushed steel, black lettering, etched clean. Gate C-12. This is where we remembered who we serve. In honor of Colonel Thomas Callahan, Medal of Honor recipient, public ethics advisor, and reminder that quiet dignity deserves the loudest respect. A woman in a navy blazer was standing off to the side, arms crossed. Brenda Holloway. She wasn't on duty. She wasn't even in uniform. But she'd come. Someone had told her the press might be here, that some senior executives were flying in. She wanted to see for herself, maybe even speak up. But the moment the plaque was revealed, she knew. There was no place for her voice here anymore. She'd spent days crafting an email, half explanation, half defense. Never sent it. Too late. Now, she watched as the new director of passenger experience took the mic. A woman who had just transferred in from a European partner airline, and the words hit harder than Brenda expected. Let this gate serve as a daily reminder. We don't just move people, we carry their legacies, their pain, their families, their silence. We will never forget that again. A screen behind the speaker flickered on. It played a short video, no narration, just music. The now famous clip of Tom Callahan sitting alone, holding his 32B boarding pass. Then the moment he looked up. Then the sudden arrival of the CEO. Text faded in over the video. 1 seat, 1 man, 1 call. Followed by, numbered 32B no more. People in the crowd began recording. One older gate agent removed his cap. A younger woman near the front wiped her eyes, and Brenda turned away, because there was nothing left for her to say. Inside a nearby conference room, the final verdict had just been handed down. A formal letter signed by the company's legal department and the Board of Ethics. Subject: Brenda Holloway. Termination of employment, effective immediately. Grounds: repeated violation of passenger dignity protocols, failure to escalate when triggered under Heroes Liaison Policy, public misrepresentation of company values. Mark was called in 5 minutes later. He expected a conversation. Instead, they handed him a badge. Not just any badge. Senior Liaison Officer, Veteran and Distinguished Passenger Services. It wasn't just a title. It was a department, built from scratch. And he was going to lead it. Back at Gate C-12, the press had arrived. Local networks, a few aviation bloggers, even a military podcast host with a handheld mic and a GoPro. One reporter asked, "Is Colonel Callahan here today?" The executive shook his head. He's where he always wanted to be, outside the spotlight. What no one knew was that Tom was watching from home, seated in his favorite recliner, cup of tea in hand, a soft radio humming in the background. Sarah had sent him a photo of the plaque. He didn't say anything, just tapped the screen twice and set the phone down. Before we continue, tell us in the comments, what's one act of quiet dignity you've seen that changed everything? We'd love to hear your story. Later that afternoon, A memo hit inboxes across the international aviation community. Subject line: Global Alignment. Adoption of the Callahan Clause. Phase 1 implementation. Inside, 9 participating airlines, 4 international hubs, 3 training centers, target completion, 90 days. And at the bottom, the goal is not just better service, it's better humanity. And just like that, a quiet man with a folded boarding pass and a wounded back had changed the direction of an entire industry. Not with a protest, not with anger, but with presence, with being still, with letting others see what they had chosen to overlook. Meanwhile, Brenda stepped out of the terminal, now just another figure in a coat and scarf. No title, no badge, just silence, and the bitter taste of a story that had passed her by. The front porch of Tom Callahan's home in Charlottesville was quiet that Sunday morning. The October breeze moved through the trees with just enough chill to hint that fall was here for real this time. A single American flag fluttered gently from a weathered pole on the railing. The kind you don't buy for show. The kind that's been there long before anyone cared to look. Tom sat on a wooden bench, a book in one hand, a mug of lukewarm tea in the other. His phone was face down on the table next to him. It had buzzed a few times. Emails, likely. Maybe another article, another mention, another opinion. He hadn't looked. He didn't need to. He thought he was alone until the sound of footsteps broke the quiet. Soft, uncertain, young. He turned slightly and saw 3 people approaching the gate. 2 young women and a man in a navy peacoat. All in their early 20s, maybe younger. Their posture gave them away. Not family, not neighbors. Visitors. They stopped at the bottom of the steps. One of the women cleared her throat. "Sir, are you Colonel Callahan?" He nodded once. Not warmly, not coldly, just plainly. The man stepped forward. "We're from UVA, 4th year ethics seminar. Our professor asked us to pick a public moment that shifted national behavior and trace it back to the individual who caused it." He gestured vaguely. "So, we picked you." Tom raised an eyebrow. "That's so." The woman stepped in. "We're not here to intrude, but we watched what happened at Gate C-12, and the aftermath, and how you handled it. And we wanted to understand how someone stays that calm when being disrespected, how you don't fight back the way people usually do online." Tom chuckled softly. "You think silence isn't fighting back?" They looked at each other. "I guess we've never seen it done like that," one said. Tom gestured to the empty chairs around the porch. "Sit. If you're gonna ask questions, do it proper." They sat without hesitation. He didn't rush to fill the silence. He let the breeze speak first. Then, finally, "I didn't stay calm because I wasn't angry," he said. "I stayed calm because anger's loud, and most people stop listening once they hear it." One of the students wrote that down. Tom noticed but didn't comment. "What most folks don't realize," he continued, "is that power doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears patience. Sometimes it sits back and lets someone else show their hand." The young man looked up. "So you let her?" Tom raised a hand slightly. "No, I didn't let her do anything. She showed herself. I just didn't stop her." The group sat still for a long moment, absorbing the weight of that. Then one of the women leaned forward. "Do you think the system really changed? Or are people just pretending until the story fades?" Tom sipped his tea. "Systems don't change overnight," he said, "but they remember who embarrassed them, and sometimes they fear repeating the same mistake more than they value keeping the old ones." He glanced at her. "That's where you come in." She blinked. "Me?" "All of you," he said. "You'll be the one standing at the podium soon, writing the policies, building the tech, deciding what counts and what doesn't. And when that moment comes, you'll remember this porch, or you won't. But either way, the world will shift again, and you'll either move it forward or let it slide back." The man in the peacoat asked quietly, "Would you do anything different, looking back?" Tom looked out at the yard. Yellow leaves scattered over the gravel. A neighbor's dog barked once in the distance. Then he said, "I would have added one more thing to that policy." They waited, but he didn't say what it was. Instead, he stood slowly and reached for a small folded card sitting on the porch rail. He handed it to the young woman closest to him. She opened it. Inside, just 6 words. Look them in the eye first. They didn't speak after that, didn't ask for selfies, didn't push for more quotes. They stood, thanked him, walked down the steps with the quiet understanding that they'd been given something that wouldn't fit in a paper, something they'd carry forward. And Tom? He sat back down, picked up his book again, didn't open it, just smiled faintly. Because sometimes legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's who walks away different. 3 weeks later, Tom Callahan was back on the porch. Same mug, same bench, same October wind shaking loose the last stubborn leaves from the maples. Sarah had just left for Fort Belvoir after a quick weekend visit. She made him scrambled eggs, reorganized his medicine cabinet, and left sticky notes on every drawer in the kitchen, just in case. He didn't need the labels, but he didn't remove them either. They reminded him she cared. Just before noon, his phone rang. A number he didn't recognize. He let it ring once more, then picked up. "Callahan," a warm voice answered. European accent, maybe Dutch, calm, direct. "Colonel Callahan, this is Annika Veldman, chairwoman of the IAPEC Global Advisory Council. I hope I'm not interrupting your morning." Tom smiled faintly. "You're already too polite to be interrupting." She laughed. "Then I'll get right to it." She explained that IAPEC was forming a permanent civilian ethics board, a global task force to oversee passenger rights, dignity enforcement, and frontline training across all major hubs. They wanted Tom to serve as honorary advisor emeritus, a title made just for him. "It would be mostly consultative," she said. "Your story has already shaped the new curriculum, but your presence would help ground the work. Lend it weight." Tom was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Who else is on the board?" Annika listed off names: former ambassadors, aviation compliance officers, legal scholars. Tom waited, and when she finished, he said, "Any young people?" Annika hesitated. "Well, no. This is a senior advisory group. Why?" "Because I'm not interested in sitting at a table," Tom said, "where everyone's already decided how the world works." There was a pause. Then she said, "Go on." "I'll take the role," he continued. "Only if you add 3 under 30 members. Different backgrounds. One from inside the industry, one from outside, one from the public." Annika considered that. "And what would they do?" "Ask the questions we've stopped asking," Tom replied. "And remind us who we're designing the future for." There was a longer silence this time. But when Annika spoke again, her tone had changed, softened, strengthened. "Agreed. I'll draft the amendment and have it to you by week's end." Tom nodded into the phone. "Then I'll show up." The call ended. Tom leaned back. Didn't say much. Didn't need to. He just stared at the breeze curling through the edge of the porch and thought, it's not enough to correct the past. You have to leave a place for the future to sit. 2 days later, his mailbox held a cream-colored envelope. Inside, a formal invitation on thick linen paper. "In recognition of your lifelong commitment to dignity, service, and systemic honor, the International Airline Passenger Ethics Council appoints you as honorary advisor emeritus, effective immediately." At the bottom, in Annika's handwriting, "P.S. Our first 3 applicants are already lined up. 2 of them watched your interview from Gate C-12 training." Tom smiled, then set the letter down beside the old envelope he still carried, from Rodriguez's daughter. Late that afternoon, Sarah called during a break from work. He told her about the role, the condition, and how they'd said yes. She laughed. "You always did negotiate with more weight than your rank suggested." "I don't negotiate," he said. "I nudge." As they hung up, Sarah added, "You know what I think, Grandpa?" "What's that?" "You were never trying to win the fight at Gate C-12. Tom raised an eyebrow, amused. "Oh," she continued, "you were just trying to make sure no one had to fight it again." That night, Tom sat with a yellow notepad and started scribbling ideas for training content. He didn't title the page Ethics. He wrote, "What we owe the quiet ones." Because in every system, in every terminal, there's someone being overlooked. And it's never too late to start looking again. The conference room in Geneva wasn't grand. It wasn't marble. It wasn't gilded. But it was full. Representatives from 17 countries sat shoulder to shoulder, arranged in a horseshoe of polished wood and name placards. Some wore business suits, others wore uniforms. One woman wore a colorful scarf with her airline's logo stitched near the hem. They weren't here for speeches. They were here to decide how the world's busiest industry would treat people when no one was watching. At the far end of the room, the final chair was still empty. A small white placard read, KOL, Thomas Callahan, Advisor Emeritus. Someone glanced at their watch. Another whispered, "Is he coming?" Then, the door opened. Tom stepped in, slow and steady. Not with fanfare, not with entourage. Just a simple gray suit, ribbon bar on the left chest, and a black folder tucked under his arm. He made his way to the seat, but instead of sitting, he stood behind it, silent, waiting. The moderator, a woman from Denmark, stood. "We invite Colonel Callahan to offer opening remarks, if he so chooses." Tom stepped forward. He looked at the room, and then he did something unexpected. He pulled the chair out and left it empty. "I won't sit today," he said, his voice calm but clear. "Because this seat doesn't belong to me." Murmurs. He continued, "This seat belongs to the man who got downgraded because he couldn't afford a higher tier, to the nurse who worked a double shift and still got ignored in the boarding line, to the teacher flying to bury her husband and was told she couldn't change seats to sit beside her son." He let the silence hold. Then, "I've had my moment, but they haven't. So today, I'll stand for them." The room stilled. Then one man stood. A delegate from South Korea. "I'll stand with him." Then another, a woman from Argentina, and another, until the entire room, one by one, rose to their feet. No music played, no cue was given, but for 60 full seconds, no one sat, and nothing needed to be said, because the message had already landed. Later, after the session closed and the cameras were off, someone approached Tom with a question. "Was that planned?" He shook his head. "No, but it was time." On his flight home, Tom sat in 2A again, but this time the seat beside him stayed open. When asked if someone else would be joining, he simply replied, "No, leave it open." The attendant nodded, didn't press. Because by now, people understood. Sometimes, leaving a seat empty says more than filling it. Back in Charlottesville, the mailbox held 3 envelopes, one from Geneva, one from a high school class in Oregon, and one handwritten in careful block letters. It read, "Dear Colonel Callahan, I'm 12 years old. My mom showed me your story. I gave up my seat on the bus last week to an older man. He smiled, and I felt taller. Thank you for teaching me how to stand without yelling. Mariah W." Tom folded the letter, slipped it behind the glass on his bookshelf, not next to his medal. Above it, and somewhere in an airport gate far away, a young agent paused before scanning the next boarding pass. She looked at the elderly man in front of her, held eye contact for half a second longer, then said quietly, "Take your time, sir. We're in no rush." Because dignity doesn't need applause, it just needs to be seen. Before we end this story, tell us in the comments, have you ever seen someone restore dignity with a small, quiet act? Maybe they gave up their seat. Maybe they stood up without saying a word. Share that moment with us, because stories like that remind the world, respect doesn't have to shout, it just has to show up.